Hi, BookTube. Welcome to another nonfiction review. This one will be some light relief. If you think about it, you look back on the nonfiction that I've read this summer, particularly Adam Zamoyski's book about Napoleon's march on Moscow, but also Eugenia Cheng's application of mathematical thinking to gender relations, and, Ciara Kremen's academic dialectics about cross-dressing. I mean, anytime you see the word dialectics on the cover of a book, you know that you've got to have all your brain synapses firing. And it's ironic that here we are in September when the school year is starting, and I'm treating myself to a less demanding work of nonfiction. Less demanding, but no less informative. I've owned, about 5 different pet cats, and I thought I'd read enough books and watched enough documentaries to know pretty much everything there was to know about cat behavior. I was delighted to find out that I'm wrong. Today we are looking at The Tribe of Tiger by Elizabeth Marshall Thomas, published in 1994 by Simon & Schuster. Can I summarize this book? On page 109, the author quotes zoologist Konrad Lorenz, who once said, "Animals have no culture." Elizabeth Marshall Thomas disagrees. This book is her cultural history of cats, looking at the physiological and evolutionary development which made all cats hunters, and then the way cat social interaction developed in line with the nature of hunting in different environments. There is attention to the differences and similarities in cat language, cat etiquette, cat leisure and play activities, and how these behaviors, they persist across all cat species, but they're mistranslated by modern humans. And the book ends by looking to the future and how cat cultures are already adapting in good ways and not so good to the reduction of wild habitats. This is a book aimed at a wide audience. It's not necessarily meant for life science specialists. If I read a passage out loud, you'll see immediately how easy it is to connect with Marshall Thomas's writing. This is from page 134. Of course, each time an animal tries to communicate with a human being, the animal is pioneering, since there are no established ways. Sometimes the animal tries something that is familiar and that works with his or her own kind. A dog who wanted something might, for instance, bark or stare or whine, all ways in which he might successfully communicate with another dog. But not all animals are satisfied with the familiar. Cats are particularly inventive in communicating with human beings, and most of us can see plenty of examples in the efforts of our own cats. Our cat, Orion, perhaps having noticed that at night I would investigate noises on the stairs, once jumped hard from step to step and repeated the procedure so successfully that I thought the sound was being made by a heavy person, and I got out of bed to investigate. Orion had, I saw, been jumping on the top 3 stairs only, and when he got to the 3rd step from the top, he would go back up and do his jumps over again. He was just starting over the 4th or 5th time when I arrived. He then looked at me and meowed. He had food, he had water, he had a cat box. In short, he lacked nothing that I ordinarily would provide for him. It occurred to me that he wanted to go out and needed me to open the cat door for him, but we had long since been keeping our cats indoors at night for fear of a coyote, and I couldn't oblige him. I said aloud, "I'm sorry, but I can't let you out." His eyes lingered on mine, as if he were taking in what I had told him, and then he turned his head and went on down the stairs in perfect silence. Did we communicate what I believe we communicated? Had he really wanted to go out? Had he understood my remark, or some of it, and deduced the rest from the tone? Possibly. He was certainly communicating something, and I may, or may not, have picked it up. Okay, what is known about the author? Elizabeth Marshall Thomas was the daughter of 2 American anthropologists, Lorna and Lawrence Marshall. She was born in 1931. In the early 1950s, she accompanied her parents on a 6-year expedition in Namibia and Botswana to observe the hunter-gatherer people there, and she kept extensive journals during the time. After returning to the United States, she finished an English degree at Radcliffe College, which is now one of the undergraduate colleges that's part of Harvard University. Her journals were what furnished the material for her first published nonfiction works, which were The Harmless People in 1959 and Warrior People in 1965. She revisited Africa in the 1980s and made revisions to The Harmless People in light of the changes that she saw in southern Africa since her previous visit. Throughout the late 1980s and 1990s, she wrote several other works about animal behavior and 3 novels as well. And in 2020, she started her own YouTube channel. So I'm going to give a shout out to that here right now, Elizabeth Marshall Thomas 8141. And she used it to read aloud from her latest novel, Growing Old. Elizabeth Marshall Thomas lives in New Hampshire, and a few days ago, she turned 93. So, happy birthday, Elizabeth. How is this book structured? The book divides into 3 parts. Part 1 is called The Animal, and it's a very detailed fact sheet on cat anatomy and its impact on cat behavior with examples. There were aspects of behavior that I had not read about before, such as the continental migration of different cat species, and why, for example, North American pumas and African cheetahs are actually closer relatives to each other than they are to the cats around them, like lions or bobcats. And yet, pumas and cheetahs no longer live in the same parts of the globe. Marshall Thomas shares studies of social behavior in a community of barn cats and also introduces us to a puma named Ruby, who was raised from a kitten by humans. Part 2 is titled The Old Way, as you can see here from the illustration, and the copyright pages reveal that sections of this writing first appeared as articles in The New Yorker. Here, Marshall Thomas is calling upon her time in southern Africa and what she learned from the families of hunter-gatherers and field-working scientists about the way lions and humans lived together. And I use the past tense quite deliberately because even in an environment as remote and challenging as the Kalahari Desert, there is no escape from the modern resource-hungry world. Marshall Thomas talks about how lion populations have had to adjust. Part 3 is the shortest section, but very interesting because it offers Marshall Thomas's knowledge of puma social behavior in order to provide a critical look at what does and what should happen when urban areas start to encroach on wild spaces where pumas live. And she focuses in particular on Denver and Boulder, Colorado. There is a partial bibliography at the back of the book, but there's no subject index. Now, how did I get this book and how much did it cost? I bought this book secondhand, and I'm just going to open up the inside cover here. You probably won't be able to see it, but in pencil, the price is £2.95. That's about $3.90. In those years, you know, when we used to attend the Hay Festival, because I feel pretty sure that this is a Hay purchase, that's when the person who watches television and myself, we did some serious book hauls, right? You know, the trunk of our car at the end of the week used to be so full of bags of books that it was a real challenge to try and get our suitcases back in there. Now, I can't see an ebook version of The Tribe of Tiger. I've looked in the Kindle and Kobo stores. I really think Elizabeth Marshall Thomas's publishers should consider an ebook version to put her books back into the eye line of an ebook reading audience. But there are lots and lots of secondhand paper copies online, and the prices are as good or better than what I paid for mine. Why did I choose to read this book? How should I describe my reason? When I was writing this script, I started by saying, oh, this is my reading version of a power nap. But I thought, no, don't say that, because people will think that the book sent you to sleep. So then I edited that out, and I thought I'll call it the reading version of a weekend break. But then I thought, no, that sounds like I'm trying to get away from the book completely. If I call it a reading snack, will that make sense? I read a lot of lengthy nonfiction. You probably can tell that by now. And difficult subjects don't worry me. But everybody needs a break, don't they? I get my exercise on one of those stationary bicycles. And you know how you can adjust the pressure on the pedals to make the workout harder, as if you're pedaling uphill. So I do that. For most of the workout, I've got it set pretty high. But then at intervals, during the exercise time, I turn the pressure down just to give myself a little break. So that's what this book is. It's still perfectly good nonfiction, but it's an easier ride than other books. Have I encountered anything unexpected or interesting in this book? I think the most satisfying section of this book was provided by the experiences that Marshall Thomas had when she was living among the hunter-gatherer peoples of the Kalahari Desert in the 1950s and again in the 1980s. Changes in that environment, changes in the activities of humans in that environment have changed the social interaction between lions and humans, and a quality of connection has been lost. And it may not have been written down in any other book and preserved. So I think that is important. And I'd like to read a passage about that from page 129. I used to ask people what would happen if someone met a lion in the bush. If that should happen, I would be told, one should walk purposefully away at an oblique angle without exciting the lion or stimulating a chase. Several times people showed us how to do this, but we never met a lion. Although among us we spent at least parts of more than 50 person years in the bush there, we never once had occasion to use the technique we had learned. We saw it used. One day, in the close quarters of some heavy bush, in the furthest waterless reaches of the Kalahari, my brother and I met a lion. He was all golden in the sunlight, with a golden mane. He seemed very large, and unlike many Kalahari animals today, he was in beautiful physical condition. He had no scars or scratches, and had plenty of flesh on his bones. Stupefied, we gazed at him, in awe of his presence and his beauty. He stood still, gazing at us. How long we might have stayed this way, I don't know. My brother and I were too dazzled to do anything, so the responsibility fell upon the lion, moving calmly, confidently, purposefully, keeping us in view without staring at us aggressively. He walked away at an oblique angle. The effect of the encounter on us, or at least on me, was memorable. The lion was only a few feet away, and I could have become afraid for my life. Yet his intentions were so clear, and his demeanor was so reassuring, that I felt absolutely no fear, not even alarm, just interest and wonder. Is there anything that readers should be prepared for if they decide to read this book? Well, Marshall Thomas has opinions about keeping cats in zoos and in circus troupes. She also has things to say about places like Denver and Boulder, Colorado, where the city limits are beginning to extend up into the wooded mountains, which are puma territory. They gave me a perspective I'd not heard before about how humans and wild animals can coexist in places where modern life has completely changed the landscape and the possibilities for wild cats have changed. I can imagine some people will have very different views on these subjects from Marshall Thomas, but she's not a belligerent writer, okay? I think anybody would find her book enjoyable and informative, even if they happen to disagree with the author on a particular issue. The other interesting thing about this book, of course, are the pencil drawings, which you have seen me showing off throughout this review, and they are the book illustrations provided by Jared T. Williams, who's pictured below. I love these. It was the energetic stroke work combined with a very faithfully rendered detail, particularly of cats' faces and proportions, and it created a sense that it's like the drawings had captured the energy of the cats, or the potential energy, so that even if they're relaxing, like this leopard is now, you just get the sense that they have been doing something. I've included a link in my description box to Jared's WordPress pages, because there you'll find more of his drawings and paintings, and also some of his poetry. And finally, any ideas for related or follow-up reading? Yes, there were loads. So many, in fact, that I had to try to get it down to a short list. And so for you, I have this down to 2 titles now. The first one is Herding Hemingway's Cats. Now, this doesn't, strictly speaking, have anything to do with cats, although it might mention them. It might. But reading Marshall Thomas's book, where she talks about the changes in cat physiology, has made me think about DNA and genetics, and that's what this book is about. According to the Amazon write-up, it is a look at how DNA is packed and unpacked and read. That's a subject area about which I know, nothing. And now I try to think, but no, nothing. And so right away I'm attracted, as you know, whenever I see a knowledge gap. that needs to be filled. And the second book is a little known work by Doris Lessing. It's a combination of short stories and essays about cats. This is the kind of book I would buy. And by the way, I only have to wait another 6 weeks before I can buy books. Yeah. But this is the kind of book that I would buy if I ever reach another point where I need some light relief after a lot of heavy reading. This looks like a proper piece of cat lovers' escapism. And that is another review done. Oh, except one more shout out, because the illustration you see here obviously isn't a pencil drawing by Jared Williams. This photograph comes from my friend Georgie, and this is her cat Evie. Evie is an excellent hunter. She has definitely retained the skills of her wild ancestors. Also, I should mention that myself and the person who watches television, back in August, we crossed a boundary line. We went into Cambridgeshire because Cambridgeshire library system allows residents from neighbouring counties to hold a library card. And of course, that includes the city of Cambridge, University City. So it definitely expands the number and the quality of books that I can borrow. And when we were in our nearest branch, I found such a prize. I found a biography of Leo Tolstoy, which was the last reference work I really wanted to complete before I started a reread of War and Peace. So it's a hefty hardback, though. It comes in at 454 pages, so expect some reading vlogs, as I've done before, to try to break that up. Happy September reading to everybody out there, and I'll see you again in a few days' time. Take care. Bye-bye.